The morning sun streamed weakly through the tall windows of the Jefferson County Courthouse, casting long stripes across the polished wooden floor. The air inside was still, heavy with anticipation. Lawyers shuffled papers nervously, their polished shoes squeaking faintly against the floor. Spectators murmured quietly in hushed tones, exchanging glances with a mix of curiosity and tension. A small crowd had gathered, some drawn by the legal proceedings, others by the presence of the K-9 unit invited for a demonstration. Cameras from local news stations peeked discreetly over the shoulders of spectators, their lenses trained on the courtroom, recording every movement for the morning broadcast. At the far end of the room, Judge Reynolds sat behind the elevated bench, his gavel resting neatly in front of him. His eyes, sharp and attentive, flicked from file to file, absorbing every detail of the case at hand. His expression was stern as always, but the faint crease between his eyebrows betrayed a lingering fatigue from years on the bench. Today was an unusually tense session. A high-profile case had drawn attention, not only from the local community but from state authorities, and every person in that room felt the weight of the day. Seated near the back, clutching her mother's hand, was Lily, a 3-year-old girl with a mop of chestnut hair curling softly around her face. She had been dressed in a bright yellow dress, its frills slightly rumpled from her restless excitement. Her big, dark eyes darted nervously from one corner of the courtroom to another, taking in the unfamiliar world of suits, papers, and solemn faces. She didn't fully understand why everyone seemed so serious, or why whispers of anticipation rippled through the air. But her gaze fell on a figure that immediately captured her attention, a large, sleek German shepherd sitting obediently beside an officer. Max, the police dog, was a sight to behold. His coat gleamed a deep black and tan, his muscles coiled like a spring even as he remained perfectly still. His amber eyes scanned the room methodically, taking in every movement. He had been trained to sense danger, detect narcotics, and respond to commands instantly. Today, he was there for a more public-facing role, a demonstration of the abilities and discipline of K-9 units, but he carried the aura of authority that had earned him respect in countless operations. Officers around him stood alert, their hands resting lightly on their belts, watching both the dog and the room with a practiced vigilance. The contrast between the severity of the courtroom and the presence of the dog created an unusual tension. Lily's mother, seated beside her daughter, whispered softly, "Stay calm, honey, just watch." Lily nodded, her tiny fingers gripping her mother's hand tightly, but her gaze never left Max. Her lips parted slightly as she observed him. Something about the dog called to her, a mixture of awe, curiosity, and an instinctive sense of trust. Max's eyes, seemingly aware of her attention, flicked briefly in her direction before returning to the task at hand, giving her a subtle acknowledgement that made her giggle softly. Across the room, spectators began to notice the interaction. Some smiled quietly, recognizing the innocence in the child's attention. Others glanced at their neighbors with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. A 3-year-old, so small and seemingly powerless, captivating the attention of a room full of adults engaged in serious legal matters. Even Judge Reynolds, known for his reserved demeanor, allowed a slight softening of his features as his eyes caught the scene in the back of the room. The lawyers were preoccupied with their notes and case files, but a few discreetly watched Lily. Her presence was a reminder that life outside the case existed, that the world of innocence and kindness still had a place even in a room filled with law, order, and consequence. Officer Daniels, standing beside Max, noticed her interest too. A seasoned K-9 handler, he had seen countless people approach the dog with fear, excitement, or admiration, but children's attention had a particular purity. He allowed himself a small smile, wondering if Lily would approach closer or simply observe. Lily's curiosity soon became impossible to contain. She shifted slightly in her seat, pointing a tiny finger toward Max. Her voice, barely above a whisper but strangely clear in the quiet room, broke the tension. "Good dog." The words were so unexpected, so innocent, that a few heads turned immediately. Lawyers paused mid-note, spectators leaned forward, and the judge raised an eyebrow. The courtroom, usually rigid and composed, felt a subtle ripple of warmth spread through it. The officers exchanged quiet glances. Max, sensing the praise, tilted his head slightly, his ears twitching as if he understood. He wagged his tail just enough to signal acknowledgement without breaking the discipline that had been ingrained through rigorous training. Lily's mother beamed, proud of her daughter's boldness, while suppressing a laugh that might have embarrassed her little girl. The murmurs of the audience grew softer, replaced by a collective smile. It wasn't just Lily's words that captured the room. It was the courage behind them. A 3-year-old, in the midst of strangers, in a place of formality and authority, had spoken from her heart. That simple act of honesty and admiration carried a weight far beyond her years. The judge allowed himself a faint smile, silently acknowledging that sometimes wisdom and truth came from unexpected places. The lawyers, despite themselves, found their concentration shifting, their thoughts momentarily drawn away from motions and precedents to the small, extraordinary scene unfolding before them. Officer Daniels knelt slightly, bringing his face closer to Max's level, and gave a quiet command. Max moved closer to Lily, maintaining a perfect balance between authority and gentleness. The dog's presence, usually intimidating, now seemed protective and comforting. Lily's giggle filled the quiet corners of the room, echoing softly against the walls, breaking the monotony of legal proceedings. Even the photographers paused, capturing not the weighty documents or tense faces, but a moment of human connection that transcended the courtroom's formalities. The courtroom, for the first time that morning, felt alive in a new way. The usual hum of anxiety and seriousness was softened by laughter, smiles, and the unexpected harmony between a child and a police dog. It was a delicate, fragile moment, one that could be gone in a heartbeat, but it lingered, settling gently over everyone present. Even the most focused participants, sworn to maintain the decorum and intensity of legal procedure, were caught in the spell of Lily's innocent praise. Outside, the sunlight continued to creep across the floorboards, highlighting the contrast between the rigid authority of the courtroom and the spontaneous, unpredictable warmth of human emotion. The microphones recorded the murmurs of the audience, capturing a rare intersection of law, innocence, and instinctive kindness. And in the middle of it all, Lily's eyes sparkled as Max's tail gave a gentle, approving wag. The moment was unremarkable to the world at large, yet extraordinary to those present, a memory that would remain etched in the minds of officers, spectators, and even the judge for years to come. It was a morning that promised routine and order, but delivered something far richer, a lesson in humility, the power of innocence, and the ability of even the smallest voices to shift the mood of a room. The weight of the case, the serious faces of attorneys, and the watchful eyes of the judge could not compete with the purity of a 3-year-old's admiration. And as the court prepared to continue, a subtle but undeniable truth had taken hold. Sometimes the smallest acts carry the greatest impact. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Lily's tiny voice rang out again, simple but clear. "Good dog." That 2-word compliment, innocent as it was, hung in the air, cutting through the usual rigidity of legal proceedings. Heads turned, spectators leaned forward. Lawyers, frozen mid-note, glanced at one another, some suppressing smiles behind their hands. Even the judge, known for his unflappable demeanor, allowed the faintest quirk of his lips, betraying the softening of his stern expression. No one had expected a 3-year-old to command attention in a room full of authority, and yet she had. Officer Daniels, Max's handler, noticed immediately the effect Lily's words had, not just on the people, but on the dog himself. Max, trained to respond to commands, was also keenly aware of human emotion. He turned his amber eyes toward Lily, his head tilting slightly as though understanding her praise. His tail, rigid for most of the morning, gave a slow, measured wag, a subtle acknowledgement of her words. The spectators noticed, and the room seemed to collectively exhale. What had begun as a tense legal morning had transformed into something entirely unexpected, a moment of warmth, a tiny spark of human connection. Lily's mother's hand tightened on her daughter's, a mix of pride and amusement shining across her face. "She's so brave," she whispered to a friend beside her, keeping her voice low but unable to hide the smile. The small crowd of spectators shared quiet smiles, their attention torn between the ongoing proceedings and the charming scene unfolding behind the benches. Children rarely spoke up in such formal settings, and to hear Lily's voice, clear, confident, and filled with admiration, was both surprising and delightful. The judge, sensing the subtle shift in the room's energy, leaned forward slightly. "It seems we have a young observer," he said, his voice soft but audible, commanding just enough attention without breaking decorum. "Perhaps we should take a moment to acknowledge the honesty and courage of our littlest spectator." The words, though spoken in his usual formal tone, carried a warmth that rippled through the courtroom. Lawyers exchanged quiet glances, some suppressing chuckles, and even the officers seemed to relax. Max, standing alert but calm, seemed to sense the shift in human energy, the tension replaced by gentle curiosity and joy. The spectators, previously silent and focused on the legal proceedings, now felt a magnetic pull toward the tiny girl and the dog she admired. Cameras from the news crew, discreetly positioned at the back, captured every subtle movement. The way Lily's fingers wiggled as she pointed, the slight tilt of Max's head, the careful watchfulness of Officer Daniels as he allowed his canine partner to interact. For those watching later on television or social media, it would seem like a brief, heartwarming blip. But in the courtroom, it stretched, suspended in time, as if the world had collectively paused to witness innocence and discipline in perfect harmony. Max stepped forward, responding to a gentle command from Officer Daniels. His movements were deliberate and controlled, each step measured, yet infused with a softness that only someone trained to recognize human cues could display. He approached Lily slowly, stopping just short of her reach, lowering his head to bring his muzzle closer to her tiny hand. Lily giggled, reaching out to stroke his fur. The sound, pure and melodic, echoed softly in the high-ceilinged courtroom, blending with the faint murmurs of astonished spectators. This simple interaction, a 3-year-old girl and a police dog, held a quiet, almost magical power over everyone present. A few spectators whispered to one another, "Did you see that? She's not afraid at all. He seems to understand her. That little girl just changed the whole mood." The room, once tense with the weight of legal argument and authority, now buzzed with an entirely different energy, warmth, amusement, and genuine human connection. Officers who had spent years training Max for dangerous situations found themselves watching the gentleness with awe. Even the judge, who rarely allowed personal sentiments to surface in court, felt the undeniable impact of Lily's courage and the dog's responsive behavior. Officer Daniels, kneeling slightly to remain at eye level with Max and Lily, spoke softly to the dog, "Easy, Max. She's safe, just be gentle." Max's ears twitched, his amber eyes focused on Lily, reading her intentions, sensing her unspoken curiosity. Slowly, he extended his paw, a deliberate gesture of trust and interaction. Lily's eyes widened in wonder and she reached out to touch it, squealing softly with delight. Spectators held their breath, captivated by the connection. A 3-year-old and a highly trained K9 had momentarily rewritten the emotional rules of the courtroom. Lily's laughter, light and genuine, seemed to fill every corner of the room. It contrasted sharply with the usually serious tone of the legal proceedings, reminding everyone present of something fundamental yet often overlooked, that innocence and kindness can soften even the most rigid and disciplined environments. The judge, observing quietly, allowed himself a small, rare smile. He nodded subtly, acknowledging the small miracle of humanity unfolding before him. Even the attorneys, whose minds were trained to scrutinize every word and gesture, found themselves caught in a moment of simple, undeniable joy. The spectators, many of whom had come to witness a serious trial, found themselves mesmerized by the small but profound interaction. The cameras captured Lily's expressive eyes, the gentle wag of Max's tail, and the careful guidance of Officer Daniels. Social media feeds, had they been live at that moment, would have erupted instantly with the kind of viral content that transcends politics, crime, or controversy. In that instant, the child's 2 words, "good dog," became more than a compliment. They were a reminder of humanity's softer side, a gentle pulse of warmth in a room dominated by rules, regulations, and tension. Officer Daniels finally allowed Max to stand fully, circling gently around Lily while remaining within arm's reach. Lily clapped her hands softly, delighted, as Max responded with an obedient wag and tilt of his head. The connection between the two, unspoken but unmistakable, radiated across the courtroom. Spectators leaned forward, some whispering explanations to curious children seated nearby, while others simply watched, silent but profoundly moved. What had begun as a routine courtroom session had transformed into something extraordinary, a living demonstration of trust, courage, and empathy. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention back to the legal proceedings, but he did so gently. "Let us proceed with respect for the law, yet mindful of the reminders life sometimes gives us," he said. The words were carefully chosen, maintaining courtroom decorum while acknowledging the profound, almost spiritual significance of the moment. Lawyers straightened, officers adjusted their stances, and spectators settled into their seats, all carrying with them the warmth generated by a tiny girl and a remarkable police dog. Even after the legal work resumed, the atmosphere had changed irreversibly. What had been a room of solemn faces and muted whispers was now imbued with an unmistakable sense of hope and humanity. Conversations in low tones occasionally drifted back to the scene. "Did you see her eyes? That dog responded like he knew her heart. I've never seen a courtroom like this before." The moment had become more than a fleeting distraction. It was a memory imprinted on every mind in attendance. And in the center of it all, Lily remained captivated by Max, her small fingers brushing lightly against his fur. The dog, trained for vigilance and discipline, responded with gentle obedience, bridging the gap between authority and innocence. Officer Daniels watched carefully, proud and cautious, yet allowing the interaction to unfold naturally. The tiny voice of a 3-year-old had, in a single breath, brought warmth, laughter, and wonder into a room accustomed to seriousness. It was a morning that promised routine and order, but delivered a lesson in humanity, innocence, and the extraordinary power of small gestures. Lily's 2 words, so simple, so genuine, had reshaped the mood of an entire courtroom. Max's response, measured yet affectionate, confirmed that understanding and empathy can exist even in the most disciplined environments. And for everyone present, the memory of that brief, magical moment would remain long after the gavel struck, a quiet testament to the unexpected joys life sometimes provides. For a few heartbeats, the courtroom remained suspended in awe. Lily's voice, tiny but unwavering, had spoken the words "good dog," and suddenly, the rigid, tense environment seemed to soften. Spectators who had entered expecting hours of solemn proceedings were now captivated by the unfolding human drama. Eyes flicked from the child to the dog, from the dog to the officers and back again, as though everyone were watching a fragile, unrepeatable moment. Conversations ceased, phones were lowered, and even the murmurs of reporters quieted, replaced by a collective hush filled with wonder. The judge, a man who had presided over countless serious cases, allowed himself a faint smile. Years of experience had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing had prepared him for the profound simplicity of a 3-year-old's honesty. He leaned slightly forward on his bench, resting his hands over the gavel, and addressed the courtroom in a quiet, even tone. "It seems we have a visitor who reminds us of something easily forgotten. Courage can be found in the smallest voices." His words, understated but warm, caused a ripple of acknowledgement among the lawyers, officers, and spectators alike. Officer Daniels, kneeling to remain at Max's level, watched the interaction carefully. Max, his keen senses finely attuned, sensed the purity in Lily's intentions. He wagged his tail slowly, his head cocked to one side, allowing the child's tiny hand to brush against his muzzle. Lily giggled, her eyes sparkling with delight. The sound, innocent and melodious, filled the high-ceilinged room, intertwining with the faint rustle of papers and the muted shuffling of feet. It was a sound so pure that even the most serious adults found themselves leaning in, unable to tear their eyes away from the scene. Spectators exchanged whispers, their faces softening with smiles. "Did you see that? She isn't scared at all," one murmured. "He's responding to her, isn't he?" another asked, all lacing their voice. The courtroom, typically a place dominated by order and protocol, had been transformed by something entirely unexpected, a child's admiration. Even seasoned attorneys who prided themselves on their focus and composure felt an almost involuntary tug at their hearts. Papers were momentarily forgotten. Eyes were drawn, almost magnetically, toward Lily and the police dog who had captured her attention. Lily's mother, trying to suppress her own excitement, whispered gently, "Be gentle, honey. He's a big dog." Lily, however, was undeterred. Her curiosity was palpable. She leaned slightly forward in her chair, fingers wiggling, her attention riveted entirely on Max. The dog, trained for obedience and caution, responded with careful awareness, maintaining discipline while allowing a safe interaction. Officer Daniels, standing a short distance behind, monitored the scene with a mixture of pride and watchfulness, ensuring that both child and dog remained safe. The child's boldness seemed to awaken something in the room. Conversations in whispers began to drift toward admiration rather than procedure. Lawyers gestured subtly to their colleagues, noting the courage and innocence of Lily's actions. Spectators shifted in their seats, some craning their necks to get a better view. Even the judge's stern demeanor had softened, his eyes betraying a quiet appreciation of the moment unfolding in front of him. It was an unspoken agreement among everyone. For a few minutes, the courtroom's tension could wait, and the warmth of human connection could take center stage. Max, ever vigilant yet remarkably gentle, allowed Lily to reach out to his paw. She clapped softly, her small hands barely covering his massive paw, and let out a delighted squeal. Laughter bubbled up from a few spectators who could no longer contain themselves. The judge suppressed a chuckle behind his hand, and Officer Daniels smiled openly, ruffling Max's ears with a proud nod. The K-9, a creature trained for authority and discipline, had revealed a side rarely seen, a side that could sense kindness, respond to affection, and bridge the gap between human authority and innocent curiosity. As Lily continued to interact with Max, the emotional atmosphere in the room shifted subtly but decisively. The air, once heavy with expectation and legal tension, now carried a gentle warmth. Adults whispered quietly among themselves, discussing the extraordinary moment. Some remarked on the uncanny bond forming between child and dog, while others commented on the courage required to speak up in such a formal environment. The courtroom, long accustomed to rigid decorum and muted emotion, had become a place of shared humanity, a rare space where innocence and discipline could coexist harmoniously. Even the officers present felt the transformation. They had brought Max to the courthouse to demonstrate his abilities, to provide security and protocol, yet now they witnessed an unscripted scene that no amount of training could have predicted. One officer, speaking quietly to a colleague, said, "I've trained this dog for years, but I've never seen him react like that to a child. He knows. He knows she means no harm." The words encapsulated a profound truth. Max's response was instinctive, guided by his training but tempered by empathy, a testament to the unique bond between humans and animals. The judge, observing the scene with a rare softness, allowed a brief acknowledgement. "Let us proceed, mindful that sometimes lessons come from the smallest among us," he said, his voice carrying authority yet imbued with warmth. Lawyers nodded, officers adjusted their posture, and the spectators leaned back slightly, carrying the memory of Lily's words in their hearts. The moment, though fleeting, had left an indelible mark on everyone present. It was a reminder that even in spaces defined by rules and structure, joy, courage, and kindness could emerge unexpectedly. As the courtroom slowly returned to procedural focus, the impact of Lily's actions lingered. Conversations in low tones occasionally drifted back to the child and the dog. "Did you see how brave she was?" a spectator whispered. "He responded to her like he understood her heart," another replied. The murmurs were not of distraction but of awe and admiration. Lily had, with two simple words, reshaped the emotional atmosphere of a room dominated by authority, demonstrating the power of honesty and innocence in an environment where such qualities were rare. Lily's laughter continued, soft and infectious, as she stroked Max's fur gently. The dog remained calm, obedient, and responsive, allowing the moment to unfold naturally under Officer Daniel's watchful eye. The crowd watched, captivated by the silent dialogue occurring between child and animal. It was a rare convergence of innocence, training, and emotion, a scene so compelling that even the most focused adults could not look away. Cameras captured the subtleties, the tilt of Max's head, the sparkle in Lily's eyes, the gentle guidance of her mother's hand, and these images would later become iconic in news coverage of the event. Outside the immediate view of the courtroom, the sunlight had climbed higher, streaming through the tall windows, illuminating the wooden benches and highlighting the contrasts between discipline and play, seriousness and joy. The scene seemed almost cinematic, the interplay of light and shadow emphasizing the profound simplicity of the moment. Lily's boldness, her unguarded honesty, had turned a routine, tense courtroom session into a narrative of warmth, courage, and human-animal connection. And while the gavel remained poised for legal proceedings, the courtroom had transformed. Adults who had come prepared for hours of solemnity now carried with them a renewed sense of hope, a reminder that courage could come in the form of a tiny voice, and that empathy could bridge gaps even in formal, rigid environments. Max's subtle movements, Lily's laughter, and the shared smiles of spectators created a lasting tableau of humanity's softer, more compassionate side, a moment that would linger in memory long after the case itself concluded. It was a moment of unexpected magic, a quiet miracle in the midst of legal rigidity. Lily's words, simple yet profound, had changed the energy of the room. Max's response had confirmed the power of trust and instinct. And for everyone present, the judge, the officers, the lawyers, and the spectators, an important lesson had been delivered. Even in a world dominated by rules, order, and authority, there is always room for kindness, courage, and the enduring impact of innocent truth. As the proceedings slowly resumed, a subtle hum of warmth remained in the air. The courtroom, though still a place of law and consequence, had been permanently touched by the bravery of a 3-year-old girl and the gentle authority of a police dog. And while the legal arguments would continue, the emotional resonance of Lily and Max's connection had already rewritten the narrative of the day, transforming it from routine procedure into an unforgettable story of courage, compassion, and human-animal bonds. The courtroom, once a place of solemnity and tense anticipation, now hummed with a subtle, shared warmth. What had started as a routine legal proceeding had been irrevocably transformed by a 3-year-old girl and a police dog. Lily, seated on her mother's lap, giggled as Max wagged his tail in response to her tiny hands brushing against his fur. Her laughter was light and unself-conscious, a melody that seemed to echo through the high-ceilinged room, softening the corners of every heart present. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, drawn to the unexpected joy, their eyes reflecting a mixture of amusement and awe. The judge, observing quietly from his bench, allowed a small, rare smile to bloom across his face. Years on the bench had taught him to anticipate every angle, every argument, every procedural motion, but nothing had prepared him for the profound simplicity of a child's honesty. "Sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths," he murmured to himself, though it carried audibly enough to be noticed by a few spectators nearby. A subtle ripple of acknowledgement moved through the room. Even the attorneys, typically absorbed in motions, evidence, and procedure, paused to witness the moment. Officer Daniels, kneeling near Max, watched the interaction with a mixture of vigilance and quiet pride. Max, trained for high-intensity operations, had been taught to respond instantly to commands, but what he was exhibiting now went beyond training. The dog sensed innocence and trust and responded with gentleness, a rare balance that few humans could achieve. Max lowered his head, allowing Lily to place her tiny hands on his back, feeling the warmth and strength of his body beneath her fingertips. It was a delicate moment of trust, an unspoken dialogue bridging instinct, training, and pure human emotion. Spectators whispered quietly among themselves, many trying to describe the scene to their neighbors. "Look at her, she's not even afraid. He's responding to her like he knows her heart. I've never seen a courtroom like this." The murmurs, soft yet animated, reflected the universal recognition of an extraordinary event, innocence and courage meeting disciplined authority in a moment so unexpected it seemed almost magical. Cameras from news crews captured every subtle gesture, the tilt of Max's head, the sparkle in Lily's eyes, the careful guidance of Officer Daniels, and these images would later be replayed countless times on television and social media. Lily's mother leaned in, whispering encouragement. "That's right, honey, be gentle. He's a big dog, but he's friendly." Lily nodded seriously, her tiny fingers continuing to trace along Max's fur, her laughter now interspersed with a sense of pride. Max responded by wagging his tail more noticeably, a gentle yet deliberate motion that communicated both trust and affection. Officer Daniels remained close, vigilant, yet allowing the natural interaction to continue. The energy in the courtroom had shifted completely. The rigid tension that had dominated the morning was replaced by a shared sense of joy and connection. The lawyers, previously preoccupied with legal strategies and notes, found their attention drawn to the pair. They exchanged quiet glances and subtle smiles, some suppressing laughter behind their hands. Papers were forgotten for the moment. Their focus was no longer on motions or arguments, but on the spectacle of trust and innocence unfolding in front of them. The courtroom, a space usually defined by procedure, hierarchy, and decorum, had become a theater of warmth and unexpected humanity. Even the officers, trained to maintain authority and composure in the presence of a highly trained K9, were moved by the interaction. One whispered to a colleague, "I've trained Max for years, but I've never seen him react like this to a child. He senses her kindness." Another nodded in agreement, remarking on the rare connection between a human and a dog, one that could communicate volumes without a single word. Max, aware of every nuance in Lily's tone, posture, and gestures, adjusted his behavior subtly to convey reassurance, calm, and gentleness, a living demonstration of empathy and training working in perfect harmony. The spectators, many of whom had come prepared for a long, serious session, now found themselves leaning back in their seats, watching with a mix of amusement and admiration. Some whispered to neighbors, pointing out the gestures and subtle signals exchanged between child and dog. Others simply watched in silence, caught up in the rare authenticity of the moment. What made the scene so captivating wasn't just Lily's laughter or Max's obedient responsiveness. It was the authenticity of their connection. In a room dominated by rules, procedure, and formal authority, a 3-year-old's pure-hearted curiosity had reshaped the emotional landscape. The judge, who rarely allowed personal emotions to surface during proceedings, leaned slightly forward, resting his hands over the gavel. His eyes softened as he observed Lily giggling while Max responded to her every gesture with perfect discipline. "Perhaps we can all take a small lesson today," he said quietly, almost to himself, though some spectators caught the words. Even in structured environments, innocence and kindness remind us of what truly matters. The words, understated yet powerful, reverberated across the room. Spectators nodded subtly, officers straightened with renewed awareness, and lawyers allowed themselves the briefest moments of reflection on the purity of the scene before them. Lily, emboldened by Max's gentle response, reached a little closer, laughing as the dog shifted slightly to accommodate her touch. The crowd reacted almost instinctively. Soft chuckles, warm smiles, and whispers of admiration filled the air. One elderly woman leaned over to her companion, saying, "I haven't seen anything like this in all my years attending court." Another spectator nodded in agreement, commenting on the uncanny way Max seemed to understand the child's intent. Cameras clicked, capturing the warmth, the innocence, and the unexpected human-animal bond that had captivated the room. Officer Daniels allowed Max to stand fully, circling slowly around Lily while remaining alert and vigilant. Lily clapped her hands softly, delighted, as Max gave a controlled wag of his tail, a subtle display of approval. The interaction continued to unfold naturally, each movement reinforcing the gentle, unspoken dialogue between child and dog. Spectators, their attention previously absorbed by the legal matter, now focused entirely on the pair. It was clear that everyone present had recognized something rare, a genuine moment of connection that transcended the formalities of the courtroom. Laughter continued to ripple quietly across the room, not the loud, disruptive laughter that might have been scolded in a formal setting, but soft, appreciative chuckles that spoke to the audience's shared recognition of a profound, simple truth. Even the judge, usually careful to maintain his authority and composure, allowed himself a quiet smile, acknowledging the unspoken beauty of the scene. Lawyers and officers alike were caught off guard, reminded that sometimes the most impactful moments were those that required no strategy, no preparation, just honesty and warmth. The subtle yet powerful energy of the moment continued to spread, shifting the mood of the courtroom in a tangible way. The weight of legal argument, the stress of procedure, the anticipation of judgment, all of it receded into the background. What remained was a rare and beautiful clarity, that a child's innocence, combined with a dog's instinctive understanding, could touch hearts in ways that words, laws, and authority often could not. As the session continued, spectators remained unusually attentive, not merely to the proceedings but to the quiet echoes of joy left by Lily and Max. Conversations drifted toward admiration and reflection rather than criticism or speculation. "It's remarkable," whispered one young man to his friend. "She's fearless and he's so gentle. It's like they understand each other completely." The friend nodded, eyes still fixed on the pair. The moment had become more than just a distraction. It was a lesson in courage, empathy, and the enduring power of human-animal bonds. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows continued to illuminate the room, highlighting the contrast between the courtroom's formal architecture and the organic, living warmth of the interaction unfolding below. Lily's hands traced along Max's back, and her laughter mingled with the soft, approving tail wags of the dog. Officer Daniels remained alert but proud, witnessing a scene that no training manual could ever replicate. For a few minutes, the courtroom existed in a liminal space, where tension and authority were suspended, and something far more profound, joy, courage, and human connection, took center stage. And as the legal proceedings cautiously resumed, the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. The courtroom, still a place of law and order, now carried with it the invisible imprint of a child's bravery, a dog's gentleness, and the soft warmth that comes from moments of unexpected connection. For those present, the judge, the officers, the lawyers, and the spectators, this experience would remain a vivid, indelible memory. Lily's innocence and Max's empathy had reminded everyone of a timeless truth. Even in structured, serious spaces, joy and human connection can flourish, sometimes in the most unanticipated forms. The courtroom had settled into a unique rhythm, unlike anything anyone had anticipated that morning. The usual hum of tension had been replaced by a quiet, warm focus that centered entirely on a 3-year-old girl and a German Shepherd police dog. Lily sat on her mother's lap, her tiny fingers moving carefully across Max's sleek back, her giggles soft but constant. Max, trained for authority and alertness, allowed her this space, lowering his head slightly and giving a subtle, approving wag of his tail. His eyes, amber and attentive, followed every movement she made. Officer Daniels, kneeling nearby, watched closely, ready to intervene if needed, but also proud to see Max exhibit the rare gentleness that came only when he sensed true trust. "He's calm, Lily," Daniels whispered, his voice steady but warm. "Just enjoy him." Lily looked up at him and nodded, a serious expression crossing her innocent features. Her entire focus remained on Max, as though the courtroom, the judge, and the officers had faded into the background. The spectators, initially curious, had become silent witnesses to a rare bond forming in real time. Conversations in whispers had turned into shared moments of reflection. "It's amazing," one woman said quietly to her neighbor. "That little girl, she's fearless and he's so gentle." A man nodded, his eyes following the pair intently. Even the judge, a man of strict routines and formidable authority, allowed himself to lean back slightly and observe, appreciating the rare display of pure human-animal connection. For a moment, the courtroom became less about procedure and more about the shared humanity in the room. Lily's mother whispered softly, guiding her daughter's tiny hands, but Lily needed little direction. She had developed an instinctive connection with Max, her gestures careful and respectful. She ran her hands along his shoulders, giggling when he tilted his head as if to acknowledge her touch. Max responded by lowering his ears slightly, tail wagging slowly, demonstrating both obedience and empathy. Officer Daniels glanced around at the spectators, nodding the awe on their faces, and allowed a small, proud smile. It was rare to witness a moment where training and innocence intersected so perfectly. The child's delight began to ripple outward. A few spectators couldn't help but smile openly, some letting out soft, appreciative chuckles. Others whispered quietly to children sitting nearby, explaining the connection between a trained police dog and a brave, kind child. The energy in the room had shifted completely, from rigidity to a subtle, shared joy. Laughter mingled with whispers of admiration, creating an atmosphere that had no precedent in this particular courtroom's history. It was as if Lily's courage and Max's gentleness had temporarily rewritten the rules of decorum. Max took a careful step closer to Lily, lowering his massive body to meet her level without intimidation. The crowd watched, captivated, as a trained animal who had faced danger countless times in the field demonstrated trust and calm in the presence of a tiny child. Lily giggled and reached out to touch his ear, which Max allowed, giving a slight tilt of his head in response. The room seemed to collectively exhale at the sight. Adults who had arrived with the expectation of tense, legal formalities were now witnessing an interaction that radiated warmth, trust, and courage. Officer Daniels spoke softly to Max, barely audible. "Easy, boy, be gentle." Max responded immediately, lowering his paw so Lily could rest her tiny hand on it, an unspoken gesture of acknowledgement and understanding. The crowd was mesmerized. Some whispered, some laughed quietly, and others simply observed in silence, fully aware they were witnessing a rare, meaningful event. Cameras captured every subtle gesture. The tilt of Max's head, the sparkle in Lily's eyes, the careful guidance of her mother's hands, and the silent pride in Officer Daniels' posture. The judge cleared his throat, reminding everyone of the ongoing proceedings, but his eyes lingered on the child and the dog. He allowed himself a small, private smile, a rare display of personal warmth in a professional setting. "We can continue," he said, his voice firm yet carrying an undercurrent of appreciation for the moment. "But let us all remember what courage and trust can look like, even in the smallest of forms." His words carried weight, not because they referenced the law, but because they acknowledged the humanity and the lessons unfolding before him. Lily continued to giggle softly, running her hands along Max's back. Max's tail wagged with a slow, deliberate rhythm, his body language conveying patience, attentiveness, and care. Every subtle motion seemed to communicate reassurance, a gentle acceptance of Lily's curiosity. Spectators who had expected a serious, dry courtroom moment were instead swept into the magic of the interaction. It was a rare reminder that even in places governed by rules, authority, and strict schedules, moments of empathy and connection could transform everything. The officers present were equally captivated. Many had seen Max respond to children in other settings, but this interaction carried something deeper. The dog had been trained for life-or-death situations, to follow commands without hesitation, yet he allowed the innocence of a 3-year-old to guide him. One officer whispered to another, "I've handled this dog for years, but I've never seen him respond like this. He senses her heart." The other nodded in quiet agreement. The shared admiration for Max and Lily's bond reflected the profound, often unspoken power of trust between humans and animals. Laughter rippled again through the spectators, soft but genuine. It was the kind of laughter that stems from relief, recognition, and joy, a recognition that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Some leaned toward neighbors to comment softly, others simply sat silently, absorbing the scene. The courtroom, typically a place of authority and structure, had become a theater of warmth, emotion, and shared experience. What had been a day focused on legal procedure had turned into a celebration of bravery, innocence, and the quiet power of trust. Lily's mother whispered encouragement, guiding her daughter's tiny hands gently. "Very good, honey," she said softly. "Be gentle like we talked about." Lily nodded, completely absorbed in her interaction with Max, yet aware enough to follow her mother's gentle instructions. Max, obedient and attentive, mirrored this understanding, demonstrating how instinct, training, and empathy could converge. The courtroom watched, spellbound, as two beings, one small and unassuming, the other trained and disciplined, communicated without words, their connection evident in every motion, every glance, every subtle gesture. Cameras continued to record the scene, capturing the genuine, heartwarming interaction in all its subtlety. News crews whispered in quiet awe, aware they were documenting something far more meaningful than ordinary courtroom footage. Later, these images and videos would spread across social media, capturing hearts nationwide. But in that moment within the walls of Jefferson County Courthouse, the experience was immediate, intimate, and transformative. Spectators' attention had shifted from legal argument to human connection, a testament to the profound impact of innocence paired with empathy. Max gently nudged his head toward Lily, who squealed in delight, wrapping her tiny hands around his muzzle. The room collectively leaned in, sharing in the moment's quiet intensity. The judge allowed himself another private smile, fully aware that the procedural matters of the day were temporarily secondary to a rare display of courage, trust, and human-animal connection. Every adult in that courtroom, lawyers, officers, spectators, recognized the subtle lesson unfolding. Bravery can manifest in the smallest voices, and empathy can bridge gaps even in the most rigid settings. The interaction continued for several minutes, each moment building on the last. Lily's laughter, gentle yet exuberant, became a background melody for the observers. Max's calm presence, obedient and patient, reinforced the sense of safety and trust. The courtroom, a space usually defined by authority and strict procedure, had been transformed into a living demonstration of connection, courage, and kindness. Spectators whispered softly to one another, sharing in the rare magic that was unfolding in real time. Even as the legal proceedings gradually resumed, the atmosphere remained profoundly altered. Every gesture Lily made, every subtle movement from Max left a lingering impression. The room, though returning to structure and procedure, still carried the warmth, laughter, and emotional resonance of the moment. Adults reflected quietly on the extraordinary lesson a tiny child had delivered. That honesty, bravery, and trust, even in their smallest forms, could inspire awe and admiration, bridging the divide between formality and human warmth. For Officer Daniels, it was a moment of pride and reflection. Years of training, countless deployments, and strict protocols had taught him precision and obedience, but moments like this reminded him why he had chosen this work. Max's gentle behavior, his responsiveness to Lily's innocence, reflected the culmination of training, intuition, and empathy. It was a living reminder that even in worlds dominated by rules, structure, and authority, connections could form that transcended hierarchy, protocol, and expectation. And in the midst of it all, Lily remained blissfully unaware of the magnitude of her impact. She clapped softly, laughed, and ran her fingers along Max's fur, fully immersed in the magic of the interaction. Spectators, officers, and even the judge carried with them the memory of the moment, a shared experience that would linger far longer than the legal proceedings themselves. The courtroom had been transformed, if only temporarily, into a space of empathy, courage, and undeniable human connection. The courtroom, once rigid and formal, had become a vessel of awe and quiet celebration. Each spectator, lawyer, and officer carried the soft echo of Lily's laughter, the gentle movements of Max, and the profound innocence that had shifted the room's energy. What had begun as a typical morning of legal proceedings was now a living tableau of human and animal connection, a rare fusion of courage, trust, and empathy. Lily's eyes sparkled with wonder as Max lowered his massive head to meet her gaze. She leaned forward ever so slightly, speaking in a soft, confident tone. "Good dog," she whispered again. Though barely audible, the words carried through the quiet room like a bell, resonating in a space where tension and structure usually dominated. Officer Daniels nodded subtly at her praise, his eyes warm, acknowledging both the dog's disciplined response and the child's growing boldness. Max tilted his head, wagging his tail in a slow, measured rhythm, his amber eyes locked on Lily. The spectators, captivated, leaned in instinctively. Murmurs spread across the courtroom in hushed tones, but no one interrupted. There was no need. This was not a moment to comment upon, but to witness. Whispers like, "She's fearless," and "He trusts her completely," passed quietly, almost reverently, among those present. Cameras clicked softly, capturing every subtle gesture. The tilt of Max's head, the soft brushing of Lily's hands across his fur, the attentive smiles of officers, and the faint glow of sunlight illuminating the room's tall windows. The judge, observing the scene, allowed a rare warmth to touch his features. Years of experience had taught him that order, authority, and procedure dominated every courtroom. Yet here, in a fleeting instant, the rules of life outside legal texts had taken precedence. "Let us proceed with the business of the court," he said softly, but even his words carried a gentle acknowledgement of the extraordinary lesson unfolding, that courage and empathy could emerge from the smallest, most unexpected voices. Officer Daniels, ever vigilant, remained at Max's side, yet he allowed the dog greater freedom than usual. Years of training had taught Max obedience, caution, and responsiveness, but nothing compared to his ability to sense human emotion. Max stepped forward carefully, placing a gentle paw near Lily's small hands without overwhelming her. The child squealed softly, her laughter light and infectious, sending a ripple of warmth through the spectators. The room, tense earlier with procedural anticipation, now shimmered with shared joy. Spectators began to relax into the scene, smiles spreading as quietly as the warmth in the room. "Look at her," one whispered. "She's fearless and he's so gentle." Another added, "I've never seen a courtroom like this in my life." Even the lawyers, typically absorbed in evidence, case law, and strategy, allowed themselves a small, genuine smile. The energy in the courtroom had shifted permanently. For a brief moment, the seriousness of justice shared space with a profound display of trust and kindness. Lily's mother leaned forward, encouraging her daughter gently. "Be careful, sweetie. Remember to be gentle." Lily nodded seriously, but her tiny fingers continued to move freely over Max's back. The dog responded with patience and care, lowering his head and wagging his tail slowly. Officer Daniels, standing alert, allowed the moment to unfold naturally. The room collectively acknowledged the lesson. Trust and courage could be as impactful as authority and procedure. The subtle magic of the moment did not escape the media covering the session. Reporters whispered quietly, cameras focused on capturing Lily and Max's interaction. They knew instinctively that this would become more than just a story. It would be a viral sensation, a testament to the quiet power of courage, innocence, and empathy. Yet even as the recording continued, the primary witnesses, the judge, spectators, officers, and lawyers, were fully present in the moment, experiencing a rare, unfiltered joy that would stay with them long after the cameras stopped rolling. Max nudged his massive head closer to Lily, who giggled and leaned into the gesture. Her laughter, light and melodic, filled the room with a subtle rhythm that seemed to harmonize with the shuffling of papers and faint coughs of spectators. Officer Daniels knelt closer, ready to intervene if necessary, but proud to see his K-9 partner displaying both strength and gentleness in perfect balance. Max's responsiveness to Lily's small gestures was a testament not only to his training, but also to his innate ability to perceive and respect human emotion. Spectators, absorbed in the quiet drama, began to reflect. Conversations in whispers revolved around courage, trust, and the extraordinary nature of innocence. "It's incredible," one observer said softly. "She's tiny, but she's fearless, and he trusts her completely." Another added, "It's a reminder, sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest power." Even the judge allowed his mind to wander briefly, appreciating the humanity that had filled the courtroom in a way legal rulings never could. Lily, emboldened by Max's gentle response, leaned a little closer. "You're a good boy," she said confidently. Max responded with a slow, deliberate tail wag, lowering his head slightly, a silent acknowledgement of her praise. Officer Daniels glanced around the room, noting the captivated expressions of the spectators, some wiping tears from their eyes quietly. The atmosphere, once dominated by tension, had transformed into something almost sacred, a shared experience of empathy, courage, and connection. The lawyers, observing quietly, allowed themselves a brief pause in their strategizing. The weight of their notes and case files felt momentarily irrelevant in the face of something profoundly human and universal. The officers, who had spent years training Max for dangerous missions, marveled at the ease and grace of his interaction with Lily. Cameras continued to record the moment, capturing the gestures, laughter, and subtle glances that conveyed a story far more compelling than any legal argument in the room. Even the judge, seated high on his bench, leaned slightly forward, resting his hands over the gavel. He had presided over hundreds of cases, yet none had delivered such an immediate, shared impact. "Let us carry forward with our work, mindful that courage, empathy, and trust can manifest in the most unexpected places," he said softly. The words, deliberate yet understated, reflected the gravity and beauty of the scene below. A 3-year-old girl teaching a roomful of adults about bravery, kindness, and connection. Max gently nudged Lily's tiny hand with his nose, eliciting another burst of giggles. Spectators exhaled quietly, sharing in her delight. The officers allowed Max a step forward, careful but proud of the way he maintained control while respecting the child's innocence. The room, still bound by procedural rules, had become a shared space of wonder. Everyone present, regardless of their role, was transformed by the simplicity and profundity of what they were witnessing. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows fell across Lily and Max in a golden beam, highlighting the stark contrast between the formal courtroom structure and the organic warmth of the moment. Children watching silently in the audience mirrored Lily's gestures, reaching out instinctively toward the dog with wide eyes. Adults exchanged quiet glances, acknowledging the rare, unrepeatable connection taking place in front of them. It was a reminder that moments of true empathy, courage, and innocence were timeless, transcending the rules, structures, and authority of the space around them. Even as the legal proceedings began to resume, a quiet hum of warmth lingered in the room. The memory of Lily's courage, Max's gentleness, and the captivated reactions of spectators had left an indelible mark. The courtroom had been irrevocably changed, infused with laughter, awe, and a gentle appreciation for the unexpected lessons delivered by a small child and a disciplined dog. And through it all, Lily remained blissfully unaware of the magnitude of her influence. She continued to stroke Max's back, laughing softly as he wagged his tail and lowered his head, fully immersed in their shared moment. The courtroom, though returning to the demands of procedure, still carried the resonance of joy, courage, and human-animal connection, a subtle, persistent reminder that even in structured, formal settings, magic could emerge unexpectedly. The courtroom had settled into a rhythm that no one could have anticipated. Laughter, whispers of admiration, and the gentle rustle of papers created a backdrop that contrasted sharply with the morning's earlier tension. Lily, perched on her mother's lap, had become the heart of the room. Max, fully attentive, remained close, his amber eyes following every subtle gesture of the tiny girl who had captured everyone's attention. The air was charged with anticipation, though no one could explain why. They all felt it instinctively. Then it happened. Lily, emboldened by the gentle presence of Max and the quiet encouragement of her mother, lifted her tiny hand and pointed toward the K9. Her voice rang out, clear and decisive, cutting through the quiet murmurs of the room. "Sit." The command, innocuous as it might seem, carried with it a confidence and clarity that left everyone frozen for a heartbeat. Max, trained to respond instantly, obeyed immediately, lowering his body smoothly to the floor, tail wagging slowly, ears perked in alert but calm attention. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Spectators leaned forward, their eyes wide with astonishment. Some whispered, unsure if they had heard correctly. Lawyers momentarily stopped writing notes, pens hovering in midair. Officers straightened instinctively, eyes on the K9, expecting a reaction. Even the judge, a man whose composure had rarely been disturbed in decades on the bench, leaned forward slightly, his eyebrows raised in subtle surprise. The moment had shifted. What had begun as a playful, heartwarming interaction had become something remarkable. A 3-year-old asserting herself, in a space dominated by adults and authority. Lily's mother instinctively gripped her daughter's tiny hands, a mixture of pride and astonishment reflecting across her face. "She's amazing," she whispered to herself, barely audible as she watched her daughter interact with the dog. Max, fully disciplined, remained in position, demonstrating both training and trust in the child's intentions. Officer Daniels, kneeling nearby, allowed the moment to unfold, proud yet vigilant, fully aware that the entire courtroom was now absorbed in a quiet, tense fascination. Spectators, unable to contain their awe, whispered among themselves. "Did you see that? She just gave a command and he obeyed. A child, she's commanding a trained police dog. This is incredible," the murmurs grew, a mixture of disbelief and admiration. The courtroom, once dominated by order, procedure, and routine, had transformed into a theater of awe. Everyone present recognized that what they were witnessing was extraordinary, a testament to innocence, courage, and the profound bond between a child and a disciplined animal. The judge, clearing his throat, addressed the courtroom with his usual authority, though the warmth in his eyes betrayed his fascination. "It appears we are witnessing a remarkable demonstration of discipline, trust, and courage," he said. His voice, calm but slightly elevated, carried through the room, drawing everyone's attention back to the gravity of the moment. "Let us all take note. Sometimes clarity, kindness, and courage can come from the smallest of voices." His words hung in the air, a reminder that even in formal, procedural spaces, humanity could assert itself in powerful ways. Max remained still, his obedience impeccable, as Lily clapped her tiny hands in delight. She giggled, her voice melodic and pure, filling the high-ceilinged room with a sound that softened the stern atmosphere. Spectators' expressions shifted, many smiling openly, some even laughing softly. The officers present nodded subtly, acknowledging Max's disciplined response and the extraordinary courage demonstrated by the child. What had been a courtroom filled with tension and seriousness had been irrevocably transformed into a space of shared admiration and quiet wonder. Lily, emboldened by Max's response, leaned forward slightly, her small hands reaching toward the dog. "Good boy," she said again, voice clear and confident. Max responded with a slow wag of his tail, lowering his head slightly as though acknowledging her praise. Officer Daniels allowed the interaction, proud of his partner and aware that this display of calm obedience and trust was rare, even for a trained K-9. The crowd, fully absorbed, watched every subtle gesture, every movement, and every expression with a mixture of awe and emotional investment. Whispers and soft gasps continued to ripple through the spectators. "I can't believe this," one woman said quietly to her neighbor. "She's 3 years old and he's responding like she's in command." Another nodded, eyes still wide. "It's not just obedience, it's trust, connection, it's almost unbelievable." Cameras from the media present captured the scene, but no lens could truly capture the emotional resonance felt by everyone in the room. It was a living, breathing testament to courage, empathy, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. The judge, now fully engaged, addressed Officer Daniels directly. "Remarkable. I've presided over countless demonstrations, but rarely have I witnessed such a seamless display of trust and discipline." Officer Daniels nodded respectfully. "Sir, Max responds not just to commands but to intent. He understands respect and caution, and in the presence of genuine innocence, he adapts naturally." The judge's gaze softened, acknowledging not just the skill of the dog, but the courage and heart of the child who had elicited such a response. Lily, unaware of the significance of her actions beyond the joy it brought her, continued to interact gently with Max. Her hands moved lightly across his fur, her laughter interspersed with delighted squeals. Max remained calm, obedient, and responsive, allowing the tiny girl to explore the space of trust she had claimed without fear or hesitation. The audience, captivated, began to reflect on the rare combination of innocence and courage displayed before them. Even the attorneys, usually focused entirely on the case at hand, found themselves momentarily caught in the magic of the moment. Pens paused mid-scribble, notes forgotten, and eyes drifted toward the pair. The courtroom, a space of authority, structure, and decorum, had become a living demonstration of human empathy and animal instinct, a place where lessons of trust, kindness, and bravery were visible in their simplest forms. Max's subtle movements reinforced the lesson. He tilted his head slightly, wagged his tail in measured rhythm, and allowed Lily to explore her small world of connection without intimidation. Officer Daniels kept a careful but relaxed watch, proud of both his dog and the child's confidence. The spectators, fully absorbed, felt an almost tangible energy, a reminder that courage is not measured by size, age, or authority, but by intent and heart. And then, as if to punctuate the entire morning, Lily's small voice rang out once more, clear and decisive. "Sit." Max obeyed immediately, lowering himself gracefully, his eyes soft and attentive. The courtroom collectively held its breath, absorbing the profound simplicity of the action. Spectators erupted quietly into whispers of amazement, their faces reflecting awe, pride, and disbelief. A 3-year-old girl had commanded respect in a space dominated by authority, not through fear or dominance, but through courage, kindness, and sincerity. The judge allowed a slow, reflective pause before speaking again. "Let this be a reminder," he said, his voice carrying authority tempered by warmth, "that even the smallest voices can command respect, inspire courage, and teach lessons that reverberate far beyond their size." The words, deliberate and powerful, resonated across the room. Lawyers, officers, and spectators nodded subtly, understanding that what they had witnessed transcended procedural norms and legal formalities. Max remained calm, obedient, and gentle, a living testament to the power of training, instinct, and empathy. Lily clapped her hands in delight, completely absorbed in the joy of the moment. Spectators, moved and inspired, allowed themselves to reflect quietly on the significance of courage, innocence, and trust. The courtroom had been forever transformed, if only for a brief, shining moment, by a small girl and a remarkable police dog. The courtroom, once tense with formality and procedure, had been transformed by a simple, extraordinary interaction. Lily, a 3-year-old girl with wide, innocent eyes, and Max, a disciplined police dog with years of training behind him, had created a moment that would be remembered long after the day's legal proceedings concluded. Spectators, lawyers, and officers alike felt a sense of quiet awe settle over the room, a recognition that they had witnessed something rare, pure, and deeply human. Lily's mother gently lifted her daughter from her lap, hugging her close as the child continued to giggle softly. "You did so well, sweetie," she whispered, pride shining in her eyes. Lily leaned forward, reaching out one last time to pat Max on his broad, strong head. The dog responded with a slow, deliberate wag of his tail, amber eyes soft and attentive, as though acknowledging the bond they had shared in those fleeting minutes. Officer Daniels, kneeling at Max's side, allowed himself a small smile of quiet satisfaction. The K-9 had behaved flawlessly, but it was the child's courage and innocence that had transformed the atmosphere entirely. Spectators murmured quietly to one another, reflecting on the experience. "That was incredible," one woman whispered, voice tinged with awe. "She's just a little girl and she commanded a trained police dog with nothing but confidence and kindness." A man nodded, eyes still fixed on Lily and Max. "It's amazing the way she's fearless and he trusts her completely. You can't teach that, it's innate." The courtroom, still technically a space of law and procedure, had been imbued with a sense of humanity and connection that transcended any legal argument or formal decision. The judge, sitting high on the bench, allowed himself another quiet smile. "I have presided over countless cases," he said softly, his voice calm but reflective. "Yet rarely have I witnessed an event that reminded me of courage, trust, and kindness in such a vivid, immediate way. Today, a 3-year-old has taught us all a lesson in bravery and connection that words alone cannot convey." His acknowledgement carried weight. The courtroom, attentive and respectful, felt the gravity of his words, understanding that they spoke not to legal principles but to the human spirit. Officer Daniels patted Max gently, signaling him to stand and return to his position. The dog moved with quiet obedience, every step measured and disciplined. Yet even as Max returned to his trained stance, the memory of his gentle interaction with Lily lingered in the minds and hearts of everyone present. Spectators continued to whisper in hushed tones, some with tears glimmering in their eyes, others with smiles wide and soft, all touched by the rare combination of innocence and courage they had witnessed firsthand. Lily's mother adjusted her daughter's small jacket, smiling down at her. "You've made so many people happy today, honey," she said, her voice warm and emotional. Lily blinked up at her mother, a small, serious expression crossing her face as though she understood the magnitude of what had happened. She reached out once more to touch Max gently, whispering, "Good boy," before letting her mother guide her back to her seat. The courtroom, attentive to every small gesture, seemed to collectively exhale, as if honoring the quiet closure of the moment. Lawyers returned to their notes and arguments, but the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. Even routine procedural movements, shuffling papers, turning pages, whispering to colleagues, carried a softer tone. Eyes occasionally wandered back to Lily and Max, drawn by the residual energy of the extraordinary interaction. Officer Daniels noted the subtle shift as well. The courtroom was calmer, lighter, yet filled with an undercurrent of shared human connection. Max's presence continued to radiate calm authority, but also a quiet warmth that reminded everyone of the extraordinary events just witnessed. The media, who had recorded the interaction with careful focus, began to whisper among themselves. "This is going to go viral," one reporter said softly, her eyes still fixed on the child and dog. "People need to see this. It's pure." Another nodded. "It's more than just footage. It's a story about courage, trust, and human connection. It's going to touch hearts nationwide." Yet even as they prepared to broadcast the story to the world, the true magic of the moment remained within the walls of the courthouse, experienced fully by those fortunate enough to witness it firsthand. Spectators began to gather their belongings quietly, speaking in low voices about the unusual, heartwarming experience they had shared. Children who had been present imitated Lily's gestures toward the dog, laughter and whispers mingling as they tried to connect with Max under the watchful eyes of Officer Daniels. Adults reflected quietly, sharing insights on bravery, empathy, and the subtle power of innocence. The atmosphere was charged not with tension or argument, but with a shared sense of wonder and inspiration. The judge called the session to resume formally, but his gaze lingered on Lily and Max for a final moment. "Let us proceed," he said, voice calm yet soft. "But remember what we have seen today. Courage and connection come in all sizes, and trust can be found in the most unexpected places." His words, gentle but authoritative, hung in the room, allowing the audience, officers, and lawyers to internalize the rare lesson offered by the child and the dog. As the courtroom slowly returned to routine, Lily's mother whispered encouragement to her daughter. "You were very brave, sweetie. You've touched everyone here today." Lily's small hands reached out instinctively for Max one last time. The dog nudged her gently with his nose, wagged his tail once, and remained still, his discipline intact but his responsiveness personal. The interaction, though brief, had left a lasting mark on the minds and hearts of all present. Officer Daniels straightened, giving Max a reassuring pat. "Good job, boy," he whispered quietly, acknowledging not just Max's obedience but the bond the dog had formed with the tiny girl. Max's amber eyes met Lily's for a fleeting moment, a silent recognition of the mutual trust that had been established. The scene, ordinary in its elements but extraordinary in its outcome, resonated deeply throughout the courtroom. Spectators filed out, many pausing to offer quiet smiles, nods, and whispered words of admiration to Lily and her mother. "She's incredible," one whispered to another. "And that dog, he's amazing. You can see the trust between them." Children mimicked Lily's gentle gestures, laughing softly, while adults reflected quietly on the rare, fleeting magic that had transformed the morning. The courthouse, once filled with rigidity and procedure, had become a space of human warmth, empathy, and inspiration. The story, later shared by media outlets, quickly captured hearts nationwide. Videos of Lily's courage and Max's gentleness were watched by millions, but the true essence of the moment, the intimacy, the shared trust, and the unspoken lessons, remained most vivid for those who had witnessed it in person. Officers, spectators, lawyers, and even the judge carried the memory with them, a lasting reminder that extraordinary moments could arise from the smallest voices, and that courage and empathy are often intertwined in ways that defy expectation. For Lily, the day ended simply. She held her mother's hand, smiled at Max one last time, and left the courtroom, blissfully unaware of the profound impact she had made. Max, obedient and gentle, followed Officer Daniels calmly, his presence a living testament to the power of training, trust, and understanding. And though the gavel had fallen and the formalities of law had resumed, the essence of what had transpired, the courage of a child, the responsiveness of a dog, and the shared humanity of everyone present, lingered like a quiet, indelible echo. In the weeks that followed, the story of Lily and Max spread far beyond the courthouse walls. Social media posts, news reports, and personal retellings shared the tale of a 3-year-old girl who had captivated a room full of adults, and a police dog who had responded with patience, trust, and gentle obedience. Yet for those present that day, no media coverage or retelling could fully capture the essence. The laughter, the gasps, the quiet smiles, and the profound sense of shared humanity that had permeated the room. And in that courtroom, long after the papers were filed and the proceedings concluded, a quiet truth remained. Bravery is not measured by age or size. Trust can transcend training. And sometimes, the smallest voice in the room can leave the largest impression on the hearts of all who witness it. For Lily, Max, and everyone present, that day became a story not about law, evidence, or procedure, but about courage, empathy, and the transformative power of innocence.